first question. Yes, down here in the front. We've got one in the middle and also in the front here. Here.
Hi, Danny O'Sullivan from LPG in World Markets. You have already touched on it in saying that $80 oil persisting will mean a 10% cut in capital investment in North America next year. But of course, you can have less investment when returns are less attractive. So I'm wondering, I'm pretty sure that doesn't mean, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you think companies responsible for 10% of that investment are going to go bust between now and next year. So I'm wondering if you have a kind of view on the dollar, all-in dollar break-even price for, say, 90% of the production from the liquids-rich areas in the US, Eagle Ford, parts of the back and the stuff. Do you have a view at which the majority of that production is still economically feasible, as opposed to, oh, well, we won't invest because returns are not so stonking as they have been over the past few years? Thanks.
We had this gentleman here.
Hi, Tom Pepper, Energy Intelligence. Yes, concerning the oil market, US light tight oil has become a dominant force in the current medium-term oil market. Is IEA rethinking the durability and height of the peak in US shale? OPEC raised it significantly and lengthened the time to peak into the 2020s. Is IEA becoming more optimistic as well?
And then there was a woman right there with her hand up.
Hi, Megan Darby, RTCC Climate News. You talked about the US-China deal and its importance, its significance. I just wondered if you could elaborate on how that fits in with your scenarios, the numbers that they announced this morning, and is that in line with your central scenario or a more ambitious scenario?
I just would like to make a short comment on the US-China deal. I think it's important to realize what we mentioned before, that it's up to policymakers to make the difference. And what we can see now with this US-China deal is that there is a huge opportunity to make the difference. But as always, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. It's not only about announcing a deal, it will also be about seeing that it's going to work. And there, of course, we have to wait and see how this deal will really be effective, not only now, but also in the next few years to come, up to Paris. Does it fit in with our scenarios? I think it does. But of course, again, it's a scenario. And the outcome of the scenario depends on political decisions. So this kind of political decision is quite important. But again, the outcome will depend on how it's going to materialize. That's the only thing I would like to say about this. And about the oil price, Fatih, well, what do you think?
They are going down. So the companies are going to bust. I don't think so, and I am not worried about the companies going bust or not. But what I'm worried is the investment in the light tight oil may be declining. As I said, our estimate on the $80 oil price means, or current price levels means, that the investment for light tight oil next year in the United States can go down by up to 10%. Why? I can tell you it may be important for all of us to understand why. Because in the light tight oil, it is like the decline is very, very steep. It is like a bicycle. You have to turn the pedal all the time to keep the production at a certain level. It means you have to invest money all the time. The investment cycles are very, very short. You have to make an investment decision all the time. Unlike, for example, in Middle East, you make an investment decision one and oil flows. It means the investment decisions in the United States for light tight oil may be negatively affected from that, and therefore we may see a slowdown in the investment as we expect up to 10% next year. And this is, I wouldn't be surprised to see a series of statements from different companies in the next weeks and months to come in terms of changing their investment plan and reducing their budgets for investments in North America, especially in the United States. Are we becoming more optimistic about the OPEC, if I am not wrong, OPEC supply? I think we are not becoming optimistic OPEC supply. We are just saying that there is, since the US oil production, even in $100 world, will slow down around 2020s as a result of the deposits we have, there are not many addresses where we can see that the global oil demand growth will be met. This is the Middle East. And then this marries with the question that I raised in the beginning. The instability in the Middle East leads to a loss of appetite of investments. Iraq, as we say, is responsible, we believe, or should be responsible, about half of the growth in global oil production. It is our estimate. It is the estimate of many other serious institutions. And today, in current situation in Iraq, as I said, the appetite for investment is very, very low. You shouldn't mix two things. The production, the exports in Iraq is going very well. There is no problem mainly coming from south. But the issue is the growth of production. For the growth, you need investments. And today, the investment climate, given the instability in the region, is close to zero. Now, how does these statements from climate change statements fit with our numbers? The US says about 27% decline, and China commits to a peak around 2030. To my knowledge, for the first time, there is an official statement about the peak of Chinese CO2 emissions. US statement is very close to our 2 degrees scenario. And as Maria said, this is a statement we have to see how these policies will be put in place. And the Chinese, again, statement, commitment is much stronger than our central case, between our central case and the 2 degrees. So put together, I think this is, once again, a very welcome news at a very extremely good timing. Thank you.
There's one thing, Fatih, I think we should add about this investment scenario in the Middle East. This is not the first time that we are putting the finger on that sore spot. Maybe you remember our deferred investment scenario. I think it was Rio 2011. We already mentioned it there that this is a huge problem that has to be settled. So this is not something new, but I think it's very important that the world realizes that the challenges are huge.
Okay, for our next questions, we'll do them in the back, please. I think the gentleman here in the with the tie. Yep.
Hello, Matthew Carr from Bloomberg News. I was just looking at one of your fascinating scenario tables, 2.6, and under that you compare new policies with the 450 scenario. But you seem to have emission reductions in that, though, comparing those two for 2030 of 18 million, about 18 billion tonnes difference between the two scenarios, which is a huge number. That's more than half of current year emissions. But surprisingly, you've got China making 36% of those emission reductions, and the US is only making 14% of those emission reductions. Can you explain how you come to that?
Okay. Yes, just right. Yes.
Hi, Nina Hałabus from Rzeczpospolita from Poland. Referring to your perspectives for the coal market, I would like to ask for your recommendations for countries like Poland that are struggling with restructuring of its coal mining sector. Thank you.
Okay. And yes, in the back, in the far back.
Terry McAllister from The Guardian. Fatih, you've given a very sort of compelling picture of what will happen to us if action isn't taken. But you also pointed out that $550 billion worth of incentives are being given to fossil fuels. Who are these countries that are doing that, and are they being irresponsible? And conversely, what do you say to those politicians, like the ones in Britain, who say that we can't afford renewable energy? And thirdly, if I may, my understanding is that Britain needs to stump up £100 billion to pay for its decommissioning overall of the nuclear legacy. Is your estimate of 100 billion for worldwide not a drastic underestimate? Thank you.
I think okay. I would like to answer the question about the coal market in Poland. What of course is very important for Poland is see to it that it reduces its import dependency on other fuels like gas from Russia. That's true. But on the other hand, if you really want to see that the coal in Poland is to be a more important part of energy security, there are two things that really should be done. It is see to it that the coal is used in supercritical coal-fired power plants and see that you develop CCS. And in that way, Poland could be a leading country in Europe, which it is not now. So I think there's more than one reason to restructure the coal mining industry in Poland, not only because of energy security, but also because of the future development of supercritical coal-fired power plants and CCS.
Thank you. Other two questions. Now, why China's contribution to the reduction of CO2 emission is higher than the United States? Very simple. The room for abatement in China is much bigger than the room in the United States. This doesn't mean that the US has to make less efforts than China, because the US efforts may be even much harder than the Chinese efforts, because the area to reduce the emissions are much narrower than in China. But I should tell you something. I mentioned to you that the Chinese coal demand growth from 10%, like an automatic 10% in the last 10 or 15 years, dropped to 5%, is not driven, to be very frank, not driven by the climate change concerns. They are driven by the local pollution concerns. And some of the numbers that you have there for China, definitely driven by the local pollution concerns, especially the slowdown of the coal consumption. Therefore, if those policies continue in China, as we have assumed in our 2 degrees scenario, just you have quoted, for the local pollution, it ends up with the 36% reduction for China. But the US efforts are also needed as the second largest emitter of the world, and therefore it is definitely needed. They both have to work, and without one of those countries moving, we have no chance whatsoever to come to 2 degrees. As I said, together about 45% of the emissions. For the colleague from Guardian, first of all, about the subsidies. Now, today, as I said, there are 550 billion US dollar of subsidies for coal, oil, and gas consumption. Many countries in the world have those subsidies, but the main subsidies are in Middle East, Russia, China, and India in terms of consumption. And to bring this price of the fossil fuels artificially down means 3 things. 1, renewables. You don't have any chance in my country, because renewables have already some economic difficulties, and when they compete with fossil fuels, whose prices are artificially lowered, the life will be much more challenging for renewables. If a country has a fossil fuel subsidy and says at the same time, I want to see the renewables growing, I think this country's seriousness about energy policies need to be looked very carefully. Second, it means I pay for you, my consumer. Please do increase the carbon dioxide emissions and add to the climate change problem. Third, if a government puts subsidies on the fossil fuels, this means that please use energy as inefficient as possible. I don't care about the efficiency that you have. When you use electricity, use your car and everything. So these are giving all wrong messages, and therefore it is one of our main suggestions for a healthy energy system phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. Now, can we afford renewables in UK or elsewhere? I think we can definitely need renewables to address the climate change and energy security issues, but which renewables projects to support and how much subsidy will be paid will depend on the economics of different renewable projects. Today, as I said, the onshore wind projects seem to be much more economic than many offshore projects, for example, or PV. In terms of solar PV, we see a decline in the costs. But we cannot have everything renewables. You know what is the peak electricity demand in Europe, even in England? It is in the evening of a February day. And even in the UK, you don't have sunshine in the evening in a February, I'm sure, in London. So therefore, you need a reliable source of power here at the same time. It can be hydropower, it can be natural gas and something else. And for this, I'm afraid in many European countries, we don't have the appetite to invest those because the framework conditions are very negative. But we see, as I said, half of the growth in the electricity generation comes from renewables worldwide. For the $100 billion our decommissioning costs, this is considered as the 15% of the total investment costs are put aside for the decommissioning. It can be 18, it can be 20, depending on the country. It can be less. But the number for the UK, it is for the 2,110. In the artist for 2040, and second, it is beyond the decommissioning, it covers other areas. But here, for me, the main issue is not the cost. Main issue, what is lacking, the cost, even if it can go to 20%, if the investment costs increase by a few percent, generation cost increase only by 1%. It's not a cost issue, it's an issue of policy. And the design of the policies of the governments, how to decommission, when to commission, and the regulation of that. And I think this is the main issue we are facing, lack of policy of decommissioning in the countries.
We've got a couple of questions. Ron here in the front, and then Junior, and then the gentleman over here with his hand up. Yes, Ron.
Hi, Ron Buser from Reuters. I have a few short questions on investment in production. First of all, specifically on Russia and in the current sanction climate, how do you see production going forward? And the same issue, NOCs, you mentioned Petrobras as being, Brazil being under huge debt. Do you see specifically NOCs struggling to increase production or to meet the goals, necessary goals? And finally, on replicating the U.S. shale, I think I briefly saw one graphic about shale, tight oil production elsewhere in the world. How do you see that going forward in countries such as Argentina, I suppose, China, and even Russia? Thank you.
Hi, Junior. I was with the Energy Industry Times. Going back to the subject of renewables and the strong growth of renewables, you mentioned we'll need thermal capacity to balance that. Now, bearing in mind the challenges facing gas-fired generation in Europe, what form do you see that thermal capacity taking?
Yeah.
Hi, Edward Gumsel with Energy Intelligence. Just touching on the LNG side of things. You mentioned that volumes are going to double up to 2040 and a number of other countries are going to start exporting. And you say this will bring a lot of flexibility in the markets if we're able to make use of that. And I'm just wondering how you see us making use of that. And also on the geopolitical and energy security side of things, in regards to Europe, Do you see LNG from the US and, say, East Africa a little bit later having a direct impact on Europe? So volumes will be coming into Europe in greater numbers? And if so, will consuming countries in Europe be paying more for their gas? Or will it just have a indirect impact by virtue of it actually just existing on the market? Thank you.
And just a couple of remarks, and then I'm sure that Fatih will have a lot of questions to answer. First, about the investments in Russia. What we can see is that the problems because of the sanctions are how to get access to capital and how to get access to technology. These are the two main issues in Russia. What you can see on the other hand, that is that for the moment they can produce whatever they want, so that's fine. But if they go into the Arctic, it will be different. Then, of course, there is the big deal between Russia and China on gas. This is a very important one, but it's also important to understand that there will be two effects. One effect is on the Asian market, where there is an extra supply, and there will not be an effect on the European market because that gas is just not coming to Europe because it's from a very, very far region, and at the same time, at this moment, we can see that the European gas market is already quite mature. So that will, although there will be more in volume when you look into the percentages of the division between Europe and Russia and Asia. On the other hand, it's Asia that will be the next market for Europe, for Russia. That is without any doubt. The other issue, of course, is LNG in the Asian market. Last week, we published a report, Asian Quest for LNG. And what we mentioned there, that there is a lot of need for LNG and for gas in Asia. And it's important to recognize that. But at the same time, it's important to see that new LNG producers will come to market, and that's important for Asia as well. There is, of course, a relation between what happens in Europe and what happens in Asia. We have seen that in the past, where because of the accident in Fukushima, it was a lot of gas that went to the Asian market, and that is because at the same time there was a decline in growth, decline in demand in Europe. But of course, that did not result in lower prices in Asia. What we expect from the LNG market is that a lot of new LNG will come to the market, will bring new flexibility in the market. Not only the the gas coming from the United States and Canada, but also from the new producers like Australia and like West Africa. Replicating US shale, Fatih? What?
I think it is rather difficult. There are areas which are promising, such as Russia and Argentina, but there are some geological and investment challenges in front of them. And even if they are to be, if we get some optimistic results from those soon, this will not change the very fact that we would need growth from Middle East. This is a matter of number. So from around 2020, we need additional through 2040, 8 million barrels per day. If you look at this light tight oil, which could come from, again, Russia and Argentina, this wouldn't go more than 500,000 KBD. Even if our LTO numbers for United States, which are, I think, exactly very, very similar to those of the US government projections and other institutions, if they were wrong by 50%, we are underestimating. Instead of we are seeing a growth about 2 million barrels per day in the next 5 years. If it's 3 million barrels per day, you still need 6-7 million barrels per day from Middle East to come. This is the main problem, that the investments are not being made today, that production growth to come around 2020s, even though the contributions from LTO or light tight oil from Argentina, Russia would definitely help to narrow that gap. But the main issue here is the investment from Middle East that are rather worrying for us. Coming back to the other issues, the Russia production. So our estimates in our report is the Russia production is more or less flat in the next years to come, but the sanctions may, plus the current price levels may well mean that the financing of new projects be a bigger challenge than previously anticipated. Because Russian fields existing fields are rather old fields and the decline trends are rather steep. In order to get new production in the picture, you need financing and investments, and the sanctions are definitely going to play a role there, and the situation may well be much more challenging. The same applies to some NOCs, such as the Petrobras, because for Petrobras today, the $80 oil price world may well mean reduction in the cash flows, which means that for the new investments for the deepwater offshore, the debt needs to increase, which will put the Petrobras in a much more difficult situation than it is today. The other NOCs, especially the ones in the Middle East, do not have the challenge at such a difficult level as in Brazil, because of their rather solid cash balances. Now, Europe, what is the best marriage for the renewables, with the renewables to have the system stability? I think in a normal world, natural gas could be one. But what we see today, there's a big price gap between natural gas and coal. And given the carbon prices being so low, coal seems to be a very attractive option, but I believe it will not last forever. Another major challenge for Europe will be, from a system point of view, is as I mentioned, there will be, if policies do not change, a substantial amount of nuclear capacity is going to retire. What are we going to replace it with? And what will be the implications of that for the system reliability in Europe is a question to be seen. But in our analysis, there is a need in the next 10 years, 100 gigawatts of capacity, which is not interruptible in Europe, in order to have a system reliability. Now, LNG, the last point, the LNG for Europe will have definitely, first of all, indirect impacts. The loss of LNG, more countries coming, and this will also change the LNG trade and the pricing mechanisms. They will affect that. There will be definitely a positive impact for Europe, because the choices for Europe will increase. This in itself is an indirect effect, both in terms of Europe can use this more choices in order to negotiate with different countries, plus there will be price effect, hopefully, as a result of the many players coming. But we shouldn't hope to see the prices will go down substantially as a result of rather substantial shipping and liquefaction costs. And direct impact can well be if Europe can make use of this surge of several LNG facilities and make the contracts and make use of the rather empty storages now with LNG up to the European countries' governments. But there will be opportunity for Europe, making the European decision makers' hands much more flexible compared to past. One final thing about the LNG in Asia. The life for LNG in Asia is, as Maria just mentioned, is very difficult. Because you have to think about yourself. You have to build a power plant in Thailand, in Vietnam, or somewhere in Asia to produce 1 kilowatt-hour electricity from LNG versus from coal. If you compare these two, to produce 1 kilowatt-hour of electricity from LNG is 2.1 times more expensive than producing from coal. So if there is no environmental regulation, why the utilities should go for LNG to produce electricity, generate electricity, 2.1 times more expensive? I think the LNG's main problem today is the price of the challenge of price in Asia.